guys, welcome back. This is a continuation video. So last time we wrote the HTML and the CSS for recreating this. So now we'll concentrate on the JavaScript. So in case you want to know how we created this interface, you can check out the part 1 of this course or of this tutorial. But if you are interested in the JavaScript and you need to have this template, you can download the source code and then let's head on to the JavaScript. But in case you want to know how it was created, you can always check out the HTML and CSS course. So we are going to work on the functionalities today. When we roll the dice, we notice that this image appears here, and the image is different each time. But one thing we'll notice is that when we get a 1, the player moves, like the active player is changed, meaning the player that is currently playing is changed. If it was the player 0 that was playing, once we get a 1, it moves to the other player. And when we click on the hold button, it adds it to the main score of the current player. So we are going to code this functionality using the JavaScript. So once again, welcome back. Let's dive right into our code. I'll be using Visual Studio Code just as I used before. So this is where we left off. So we are going to continue from here. We are opening our CSS file. We've not actually added anything to it. This is where we left off from the other video. Let's open our app.js file. Let's console something to our screen. Just to test if our app.js file is well connected or linked to our HTML file. Let's link our JS file to our HTML file. Let's open our terminal, our console. When that works, that means our JS file is well connected. Let's clean that, we don't need it anymore. So for this project, we are going to need a number of variables. The first one is going to be the main score. This will help us keep track of the player score. It will be equal to an array. The first item will record The first item will record the score of the player 0, while the second item will record the score of the player 1. We need another variable called the active player. This variable will help us keep track of the player who is currently playing and the player whose turn it is to play next. So the third variable we need is the current score variable. This will help us keep record of the current score of the player temporarily before it is added to the main score. So for basic, that is what we need. So let's take a look at the original and see what next to do. So we realize that the game starts when we roll the dice. When we click on the roll the dice button. So we need to select the roll the dice button in our JavaScript file so we can add an event listener. So whenever it's clicked, we will call on a function that will start the game. So let's give it a class so we can use the class to call it. Let's copy that. Let's go to our JavaScript file. This should be equals to document dot query selector bracket and put a dot and then we copy. So now I want to add an event listener to roll dice. So let's call the variable roll dice dot add event listener. So we want to listing for clicks, and we want to add the function. Let's call this function play game. I think that is a good name because once you roll dice, that means you want to play the game, and the game starts immediately, so it suits the purpose. So let's define that function here. Function play game. Let's complete that. Now let's save it. Now this function will only be called when the button is clicked. That is how it should work. So now from the original we can see that whenever we roll the dice, we have a number that generates, and if you notice, the number ranges from 1 to 6, meaning we generate random number from 1 to 6 each time. So we want to call that. We are going to do that using the math.random. This will help us generate a number randomly each time we click. But we'll do this using the math.float. This will help us get only whole number and not decimal numbers or floating numbers, only integers. So we're going to do times 6. This will help us give a range. So let's console this to our screen so that we can be able to see the number it generates each time we click on the button. So let's open our file. Let's reload the browser. So it's not working, but it's only working once. Why is that so? Okay, maybe I forgot to save the HTML document. So we just save that. We are still getting same error. Oh, it's because of the brackets I added here. This bracket calls the function, but rather we don't want the function to be called, we want it to only be called when we click on the button. So you can see it works when we got rid of that. But as I said, it counts from 0 to 5, but we want it to count from 1 to 6, because that is the number of dice that we have. So we add a +1 to it. This will ensure that it starts from 1 and ends in 6. Yes, this ensures that any number it generates, we add 1 to it. Meaning if it's generating 0, we add 1 to it, it becomes 1. If it's generating 5, we add 1 to it and it becomes 6. So you understand. So the next thing we need to do is to make this image dynamic. Whenever we click the dice, we get a new image, and the image will be the image with the number of dots that our dice variable generated. So we want to code that in. First, we want to select that image. Then using the dot attribute, we are going to set a new source and then give it a new value. Source. So for that, we need to get the path of the image. Then we can now manipulate it with our JavaScript, because each of the image is saved with the number of dice, meaning the image with 1 dot is saved with 1.png. So all we just need to do is just to make the dice variable that we created to stand in between, or rather to manipulate the file name, just like we have here. So let's save that, let's reload. So let's try. Let's also save our HTML document. Now so it's working perfectly. It's working perfectly. But if we notice, when we refresh the game, we get this box here. It's just showing that something is supposed to be there. So we do not want that box or that line or that border to come out. We want it to display as none, so that nothing will be there till when we click the button, the roll button, because that is when the game actually starts. So we do not want the image to show, so we'll set it to a display of none. Then we'll override this property in our JavaScript. So let's select the dice display, that is the class. We've already selected it. Let's delete this console.log, we do not need it anymore. So let's duplicate this line. So now we get the style. The display. Sorry. So style.display display property now will be equals to block. So let's save that and test it. So when the game starts, there's nothing yet when we actually click on the button. So that is good. So we want any number that we get the dice, or that is generated by the dice variable, to be added to the current score. Meaning our current score should now be equals to the dice. Okay, first we need to display that to our screen. Display the current score to our screen. So let's get this span, because this is the place we've created for the current score. So document dot query selector. So let's select the current score, or the span where we are supposed to display the current score rather. So the inner HTML will be equals to the current score. Does that make sense? So guys, if you notice from the original game, when we click on the roll the dice, it adds the dice to the current score, meaning it increments it. It's not just equals to it. It adds the value of the dice variable to the value of the current score variable, and then the current score variable will now be equals to the new number gotten. I hope that kind of makes sense. The logic makes sense. Now we want the current score to be equals to an integer, so we can be able to do this mathematical operation. So we see it's working. When we roll the dice, the number generated by the dice is added to the current score. But then when we look at from the original, it's not just added to one side, it's added to the current player or the active player. So we need a way to tell our program that it's only supposed to add to the current score of the active player. So let's try. You see, it worked. We just incancate the active player to the class name of the current score display area. Remember, the class name is current score 0 and current score 1. So the active player is either a 0 or a 1. So we just incancated the value of the active player to that class. So when we notice something, if we get a 1, the player automatically goes to the next player. You understand? So we want to add that to our code. So now we'll have an if statement. If that is not equals to 1, then we want it to continue with the process, add the dice to the current score, and display it in the span area or in the current core display area. But else, if the dice is not equals to 1, if the dice is equals to 1, then we want to change the player. We'll do this with an if statement too. Now, if active player is equals to 0, then the active player should be 1. Should be 1. But else, that means else that the active player is 1, that means the active player should now be 0. Hope you understand the logic. It's a very simple logic. If the active player is equals to 0, then the active player should now be equals to 1. But else, meaning that the active player is definitely equals to 1, because our active player is either a 1 or a 0. So let's test that. When we get a 1, you see it goes to the next player. But we want the current score of the previous player to be set to 0. We want him or her to lose his entire point. Maybe if player 0 was playing and then gets a 1, we want all the points he has gained as the current score to disappear. So now that means we have to set the current score back to nothing, back to 0, so as to ensure that the player loses all of his points before the game moves to the next player. So let's add that on top of here, because this should happen before the player is actually changed. But then we need to display that 0. You understand? Whenever we get a 1, we need to display that you've lost all your points. So that means this is the line that does the trick of displaying the current score. So now the current score has been set to 0 as well. We also need to add it to the HTML, display it in that area provided for current score. So let's test that. I think it's working. When we get a 1, the player loses all of his points and moves to the next player. What is the next step? This, the hold button. When we click on the hold button, we notice that the current score is added to the main score. So now we need to get the hold button, so we can also add an event listener to this button that will listen for click. So whenever it is clicked, the value of the current score will be added to the main score with the index position of the active player. Hope you understand. Let's just write the code. I think you understand better when we naturally write it. So first we select it, the hold, then let's add an event listener. So we want to listen for click, as I said earlier. I want to add this function. Now we need to get the index number of the player we want to add the score to, or the current score to. We will do this using the active player, because the active player is either a 0 or a 1, and we have only 2 items on our main score array. So we are going to get the main score and get the item with the index position of the value of the active player, then increment the current score to its value. So after this, we want to change the player and display and make sure that the current score is set back to 0. Hope you understand where we are going with this. Let's see if it works. Let's rerun that. Refresh our browser. So roll the dice. We are getting an error. So where is this error? It's a null distance. That means that our hold element is not it's not seen by our JavaScript file. Yeah. Okay, let's save this. Okay, you know what, let's display what the value of the main score to the screen, so that we'll be sure of what we are doing. Let's just display it. Let's duplicate this line, add the class we just copied. It's just the same thing as the current score, just same thing we did for the current score. Now let's save the current score with a variable called score, and then now we want to display this to our screen. So let's reload and let's test it. So still getting an error, meaning our browser cannot see the hold element or any element with the class hold. Why is that so? Our browser cannot see any element with the class hold, so that's why it's throwing that error. Let's check our code to know where the error is from. Oh, we forgot to add a dot before the hold to indicate that it's a class. So let's save that and run it again. One, that is the one. So it should move to the next player. So still getting an error. Okay, yes, this space, that space between the dot and the class name. So let's try it again. Yes, so let's click on the hold. So it works. Whenever the hold is clicked, it adds the score or the value of the current score to the main score, then set the main score back to 0. So we are actually going with the speed of light. We're almost done with the game. So what is the next step? So when we click on hold, we notice that this green background and the indicator, that red dot indicator there, keep moving to the current player or to the active player. Meaning if 0 is the active player, we have the background, that green background color there. So we need to be able to like change that. So from the previous video or from the HTML video, how we achieve that is by giving a class called active to the panel of the active player. So now we are going to actually cut it from here and then add it using the JavaScript, using our JavaScript. This so that we will ensure that the active class is only added to the player whose turn it is to play. So we are going to get that, and then we want to toggle it. We want to toggle the class to make sure, this will ensure that if the class was not on the element selected, it's going to add it, but if it is there, it's going to remove it. So dot class list, because we want to get the class list, and we want to toggle the active class. As I said earlier, if the class is in player 1, it will remove it. If the class is not in player 1, it will add it. Something like that. So that is the idea. So we want to duplicate this line. So also one line for player 1, one line for player 0. This will ensure that we always have an active player. So let's save that and we run it. So let's click. So we are clicking on the hold button. Remember, the hold button is inside the start the game function, which is only called when we click on the button. So for this hold to work, we need to click on the roll dice first. So it worked properly. I think this is kind of a good thing that we added the function inside the play game function. This will ensure that you cannot hold the game when you have not gotten any points in your current score. So yeah, so we want to copy this line to the else, because of whenever the player is changed, we also need the active class to be toggled and changed to the next player. So we also need this line of code here. So let's save that and let's reload and let's play the game. When we click on roll the dice, we get a 1, it moves to the next player. When we click on hold 2, it goes to the next player. So that is working. So we've gotten the game to this extent. So what we need is to work on the new game or restart game button. So when we click on the restart, we notice everything gets back to 0, just like how it was when the game started. So we need to add this code. We are going to select this where we register game button in our JavaScript and add an event listener. Then it will listen for a function. This function will help us set everything, all the variables and everything back to 0, just like how it was when the game started. Document of query select. So once I add that event listener, I'll listen for click. The function we want to add, a function. This function will restart the game. So let's just go up and copy all of this, because this is what everything is supposed to be. So let's clean this. It's already declared, so we do not need it. Sorry. So let's save that. Let's also save our JS file. Let's just add proper indentation to this line, just so our code will look better. So let's save it and run this on our browser. So when we roll the dice, it's working and it's working. So when we click on new game, everything goes to 0. So I want to change the active player back to 0, so that the game starts from the 0 player into the 1 player. Oh. It's working. So everything is working perfectly, but except from the restart game button, it's not working well. Why is that so? So the restart game button, we just need to display the new value of the main score, the active player, and the current player to the screen. So I'll leave that as an exercise to you, and also I want you to improve on this game. Maybe add like a winner score. If any of the player gets to a certain number before the other, it becomes the winner. The completed version of this program is in the description below, so you can try it. If you are able to do it, that is great, but in case you tried and maybe you are not able to do it, just download the source code and cross check your work. Okay? So you have it. This is your simple desktop video game using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So if you like this video, or if this video was fun and useful, please give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our YouTube channel.